Hello, this is Russell Henna with the Missouri Department of Conservation, and I would like to welcome everyone to the Urban Wood Toolkit webinar today put on by the Urban Wood Network. We have a few slides to go through first before we get started on our presenters. First, just a few reminders. We value your input. Please stay connected for a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. Second, this project is supported by the USDA Forest Service, Northeastern Area State and Private Forestry Landscape Scale Restoration Grant Program. USDA is an equal opportunity provider and employer. And if you want to ask questions, use the attendee control panel questions section to post questions or comments throughout the webinar. Here's an example how to do that. As you can see, you click on the arrow to hide or expand the control panel, and then you can type your questions in the questions section. Again, this is the Urban Wood put on by the Urban Wood Network. Just an overview of the Urban Wood Toolkit webinar today. Our goal is to showcase how the Urban Wood Toolkit can be used to build an urban wood use plan. Presenters will share why there was a need for the Urban Wood Toolkit in Michigan, Michigan Urban Wood resources and programs, how the Urban Wood Toolkit is designed, and how the toolkit can be used to develop an urban wood use plan. Our speakers today will be Dave Newman from Michigan Department of Natural Resources, Kevin Sayers, the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, and Margaret Miller with Spalted Banjo Consulting. Just a little overview for you of the Urban Wood Network. It was launched in June of 2017, and the mission of the Urban Wood Network is to inform, collaborate, and connect to build community, business, and consumer confidence in the urban wood industry. The goal of the Urban Wood Network is to provide needed technical assistance to targeted membership sectors, such as municipalities, arborists, sawyers, value-added producers, retailers, and organizers. Just about the Urban Wood Network, the Urban Wood Network started taking members in 2018, and this membership was free due to the Forest Service Landscape Scale Restoration Grant, which allowed us to establish connections with over 150 members in more than 20 states, 2 Canadian provinces, and Switzerland. But with the grant ending in 2019, we will be looking for members to pay an annual fee. But many of the benefits of the network are, as you see here, greater visibility, access to customers, use of the shared brand, marketing materials, product recognition, networking opportunities, and many updates and incentives through the Urban Wood Network. To join the Urban Wood Network for 2019, if you go to the urbanwoodnetwork.org, there's a join tab at the top, and you can go in there and follow the instructions there on how to join. There'll be the membership agreement and then how to pay the fee. With that, we will move on to our first speaker, which is Dave Newman with Michigan DNR. Dave is a forest utilization and marketing specialist at the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. Dave is a relative newcomer to the urban wood community and has worked as a private land service forester and as a silviculturist for the DNR for 15 years before joining the wood use program. Dave?
Okay, thanks, Russell. My name's Dave Newman. Thanks, folks, for joining us today. We first became interested in supporting this project, following some of the great work that Jessica Simons and Margaret Miller have been doing here in Michigan on the Michigan Urban Wood program. Jessica hosted a a wonderful workshop last summer, and in discussion following that workshop, we came up with this idea of supporting their efforts to put together sort of a toolkit or a series of guides for local municipalities to get involved in developing a local urban wood use program. Urban wood resources represent a pretty significant and still largely untapped resource for higher value added wood fiber. In Michigan alone, past studies have shown there are millions of board feet that could be made available per year in the form of saw logs, reclaimed or upcycled out of urban wood removals. And most of this fiber is currently disposed of at a cost to local communities, and it really doesn't make its way into a higher value product stream. From the DNR standpoint, the Forest Products Use and Marketing Program sees a lot of benefit in promoting local urban wood use programs. These programs would provide an opportunity to move that fiber into a higher value product stream, and in turn generate more greater economic value in local economies, keep that money circulating in local economies. Urban wood use programs can support more jobs for local businesses and craftsmen, and as you all know, produce some pretty unique products with a lot of character and a unique story that's tied to local communities and landscapes with all of those products that come out of the urban forest. Some of the products that come from urban wood programs also make great ambassadors for promoting the use of wood more broadly in our society. Live edge slabs, a lot of the character wood that comes out of urban forests, the different grain patterns, the species that are available, they all make pretty attractive, very aesthetic products that we can use to promote the value of using wood products instead of plastics and metal to consumers. And that's basically all I have. I'll go ahead and turn it over to the next speaker. I believe that's Kevin Sayers.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Kevin, this is Russell. Can I just give your bio here real quick and then we'll get started?
Sure.
Okay. Kevin Sayers is our next speaker here from the Michigan DNR. Kevin has been the Urban and Community Forester for the Michigan Department of Natural Resources since 2002, where he administers the state urban forestry program. Prior to working for the DNR, Kevin worked in the tree nursery industry and with the municipal forestry program at the city of Lansing. Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Russell and David. And like David, I just wanted to take a few minutes here to share my perspective on the issue of urban wood utilization as it relates to urban and community forestry, kind of broadly and a little bit more specifically here in Michigan. And many of you on the call are probably aware of the National Urban and Community Forestry program that's sponsored by the USDA Forest Service and that's administered in each of the states. And, you know, we share the primary role of providing and facilitating various types of assistance, whether that's technical assistance, educational assistance, or perhaps financial assistance for a variety of different activities and to a variety of different partners, whether those are local governments, private sector businesses involved in tree care and this green industry, or nonprofits or educational institutions. So we work with a variety of different entities on a variety of different topics related to urban and community forestry. And in Michigan, we've got a fairly significant urban component. It's a large state, but very urbanized in parts of it as well, with about 600 to 700 communities that we regularly or would expect to work with on urban and community forestry activities. Our state's population is approximately 75% urbanized, which is a trend that is similar to the rest of the country. I think it's about 75% there as well. But projections are that by 2050, we'll be looking at 80% urban population and urban area expansion. And so with that, obviously, more demand on urban trees or more management of urban trees. And, our role in urban and community forestry has really changed over, the past 20 years. I haven't been here for 20 years, but about 17, and I've seen a lot of these changes. And it's expanded, quite a bit from the basics of planting trees and maintaining trees and of course, removing trees to work that really now includes a much broader, component of things related to urban and community forestry, including things like invasive species, ecosystem services, climate change, stormwater, and use of a lot of new technology with iTree and urban tree canopy assessments, among other things. And then more to the point here, urban wood utilization. And that, is really a large part of my interest in this is that, we've had a lot of issues and reasons to refocus on this topic of urban wood utilization. And Michigan has historically been active and somewhat of a pioneer in the issue of urban wood utilization when you consider things like the city of Detroit's historic use of an urban sawmill back in the 1920s. It's probably one of the first examples of urban wood utilization on any scale. And that sawmill still exists. You can go on YouTube and type in a search on urban lumber mill or Detroit lumber mill, and you can watch a pretty fascinating silent clip of urban wood utilization in action in the 20s in Detroit. And then again, with some efforts to repurpose elm trees, with the onset of Dutch elm disease back in the 50s and 60s here in Michigan, and most recently with emerald ash borer, of course. And so this issue of what and how to utilize urban wood debris is a recurring one, of course, and one that I really think that we do well to more fully embrace to achieve sustainable solutions for. And to that end, I really see that there's been a lot of great work and opportunities that are helping to enhance and expand not only the interest, but the knowledge and demand for urban wood utilization. And I'm thinking specifically about things like sustainability programs, such as LEED certification. Tree City USA has historically and very visibly been a recognized program where communities can achieve credit for innovative activities such as urban wood utilization programs. And then a lot of communities are undertaking community climate adaptation plans and programs that include sustainable use of tree residue. Beyond that, significant amount of research, whether it's from the Forest Service and reports that have documented the benefits of this and how to do it. Innovation and innovative uses of mechanized harvesting have really enhanced our ability to promote urban wood utilization. And portable sawmills, training opportunities for how to teach people to learn to buck and grade to make better use of the wood. And then great examples of partnerships, not only in Michigan, but nationally and internationally as well. I'm thinking of opportunities to connect cities, governments with nonprofit organizations, whether it's the Habitat for Humanity in their Restore program, where they're using wood from municipalities for sale and reconstruction in their build projects. Or Michigan State University has an urban wood utilization program that's relatively new. And Friends of Grand Rapids Parks in the city of Grand Rapids. So there's boundless examples of these partnerships that have developed as well. And so finally, I would just like to say that, looking at the future of urban wood utilization in Michigan and more broadly, I definitely think that there's a, great growth and interest and demand for this. And I really see this toolkit as a way to help better inform and empower and really lead with examples on how to achieve some of our goals. And speaking of goals, I really would like to see this network of urban wood utilizers greatly expanded and sustained. So, with that, I just, wanted to share my perspective on things. I really do see a lot of opportunity. Sometimes it fits in starts and stops, but I do see the trajectory is going upwards for this.
Thanks, Kevin. We will move on to our next speaker that is going to explain the Urban Wood Toolkit. That's Margaret Miller, Spalted Banjo Consulting, with a resume that ranges from championing the opening of an Urban Wood marketplace within the city of Flint to chairing the city of Grand Rapids' first ever Urban Wood Utilization Subcommittee. Margaret views wood utilization as a vital management practice obtainable in any community. As a forester and consultant, Margaret is dedicated to viewing resource management through both an environmental and anthropocentric lens. Margaret strives to assist all of her clients by managing their projects and resources in the most effective and sustainable manner. Turn it over to you, Margaret.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just pulling up my presentation. I want to make sure everybody can see it. Are we good? I think so. I didn't see any questions or chats shoot up that said, no, can't see it. So I will go ahead and get started. So yes, I'm talking on behalf of both myself, Margaret Miller with Spalted Banjo Consulting, and Jessica Simons with Verdant Stewardship. We are very passionate about wood utilization and have been working on it for a long time, and we're happy to have this opportunity. So I wanted to go down a list of what you can kind of expect me to go over today. I'm first going to just show you how to access the toolkit, just in case you want to follow along, but then, I'll talk about the project, the funding, the author, the contributors, the what, why, where, and then from there I'm going to talk about how you utilize and navigate the toolkit. Specifically, I'll go into urban wood utilization planning, building organizational and community support for urban wood, product options for urban wood, urban log collection and sorting facilities, partnerships, other valuable resources, and then I will finish with explaining a little bit more about the network and a Q&A. So to access the Urban Wood Toolkit, if you want to follow along, and just in general, if you want to utilize this, there's a couple ways, but for now, what you could do is just click on this link that I provided you. It's the Urban Wood Network. There you'll see they have a list of tabs. If you go to resources and click on it, it'll bring the toolkit up as the first accessible link. And there it'll bring you to a PDF of all of them, all of the toolkits combined into one document. The Urban Wood Toolkit was funded in part by the Michigan Department of Natural Resources Forest Utilization and Marketing Program, and in addition, the USDA Forest Service Northeast Area State and Private Forestry Landscape Scale Restoration Grant. The authors were, like I had mentioned, Jessica Simons with Verdant Stewardship and myself, Margaret Miller with Spalted Banjo Consulting. Additional project contributors and collaborators were Dave Newman and Kevin Sayers, who just introduced themselves earlier. They also provided a lot of feedback, and throughout the process, we talked and communicated, and they were our main editors and kind of chaired the editing part of it, of which we got editors from across the country, and I couldn't list all of those, but thank you to those people. So what is the Urban Wood Toolkit? It's basically a series of 6 complementary bulletins that provide actionable and specific steps for establishing or expanding on a wood use program that in particularly relating to urban and community forestry efforts. It could be useful in other instances, but we really were looking at it from an urban and community lens. It's designed to be used by municipal foresters, city managers, but it's simple and could easily be used by community volunteer groups who are passionate about this, and students, and basically anyone that's interested in finding the highest and best use for removed urban and community trees. So we decided that it was best to develop this wood utilization toolkit because Jessica and I had been involved intimately in urban wood utilization efforts across Michigan, and we had always been surprised at the lack of user guides and resources specific to urban wood. It really was our belief that if we wanted to further this mission of the urban wood movement, that we needed to streamline and develop some sort of action-focused how-to guide. And that really was where we believed the toolkit would help people. We already knew that wood utilization, and we felt many communities knew that wood utilization was an effective way to reduce municipal forestry costs and waste and promote stronger linkages to forest products industries like you heard Dave speaking on, as well as just increase new economic opportunities. So we really wanted now to provide, like, well, how do you do it? We know it's good, but how do you do it? And so we wanted it to be simple, and I think that was really what we developed. I did want to mention that there are other available wood use guides out there. I just put two examples here. Sam Sherrill's Harvesting Urban Timber and the Forest Service's Successful Approaches to Recycling Urban Waste. But there are many more other resources which we have linked to and created one bulletin dedicated to other available resources out there. So you don't have to do a lot of that digging yourself. These are very much general urban wood use guides that are available, and while they are extremely useful, the Urban Wood Toolkit was designed to be more action-oriented, and it was also designed to allow users to self-guide themselves at a pace that's reasonable to them. I know when I was starting in Flint, we were not in the position of other cities who maybe were doing wood utilization efforts. For instance, a lot of our examples came out of California. We just were not in the position, and or Ann Arbor in Michigan. We weren't the same community as them. We weren't practicing the same type of forest management. We didn't have an updated inventory. We didn't have, staff or funding. So we had to really roll with what was available to us and kind of, make decisions that were useful for our community. And that's really what we wanted the toolkit to be. We wanted to provide resources, but we want people to really realize that you should kind of look at it from your own community and feel free to pick and choose and use what's useful to you. In addition, the guide also takes a lot of the questions that Jessica and I have commonly received about the process of creating an urban wood use plan and or an urban wood marketplace, and we talk about those common questions and common things you're likely to encounter. So there is a lot of first-person, anecdotal information in there that you maybe wouldn't get just from any other wood use plan. So in addition to being able to access it from the Urban Wood Network page, you can access it from the Michigan Urban Wood Network page, and that link is provided for you. The upper tab has a toolkit listed there, and when you click on it, it'll allow you to download each individual bulletin. So if you wanted to start, maybe you're a nonprofit that can't afford color printing as frequently as other organizations, you could just start at the first bulletin. And then, there's also the Urban Wood Network, which has a link that has the entire toolkit, and it will also have a link to this webinar. So any helpful information that I provide, you can access it there. The format. So we purposely created it into a bulletin format. We had kind of started not creating it into a bulletin format, and we sent it to Dave and Kevin, and I think it was like over 40 some pages and very overwhelming. And that was kind of the feedback, like, how do we make this more user-friendly? And how do we provide a user-friendly approach that, you know, won't overwhelm people? And so that overwhelming and being too complex was the first reason we decided to make it into a bulletin. But then again, we thought it was we were really passionate about having people be able to access it at whatever stage they are in the wood utilization planning. So maybe you're at the very beginning, you don't have a wood use plan, but maybe you're well beyond that and you're more looking at, okay, how do I establish relationships with wood industry partners? Instead of having to sift through 50 some pages of documents to find what you were exactly looking for, we thought that the bulletin method would simplify that. But then we also hope that we can continue to advance this toolkit and we can provide, you know, additional resources as they are developed and or as funding becomes available to us. And by making it not one whole big document, we wouldn't have to republish a lot of the same information. We can now have a bulletin number 7, 8, 9, etc. So bulletin number 1 was created via a document that had already been in place that I'm sure many of you have actually used. The previous publication was the Community Wood Utilization Planning Worksheet, which was developed by the Southeast Michigan Resource Conservation and Development Council, now known as the Sustainable Resource Alliance. This publication was developed, you know, by actually Jessica Simons herself in about the first year or second year of urban woodwork that was happening in Southeast Michigan. And that was following Emerald Ash Borer. So this is, you know, a pretty dated document, but the resources were still really useful. And as we were beginning to do this toolkit, we were amazed at how many communities and or state coordinators linked to this very first document, this publication that was written so long ago and was written by Jessica. So we would constantly laugh at, like, we really want to make this because maybe this will be the new thing people link to. So the first bulletin, it's divided into 7 sections. And as you work through this first bulletin, you'll notice that we ask a lot more questions than there are answers. And that's because we build on this one bulletin. We use this bulletin as kind of the backbone, and the remaining bulletins kind of break down a lot more of those individual sections. So I kind of make a joke that it is the pith of, you know, the entire toolkit is this first bulletin. So the sections within bulletin 1 are, you know, getting started, understanding your wood resources, reviewing capacity, planning logistics, managing internal communications, exploring product options, developing wood industry partners, and building community support. And throughout it, we tell the users that you're first finding your baseline, then you're gathering information, then you're evaluating opportunities, and lastly, you're following up. And we use these 4 steps to make it more simple. Each of these 7 sections are a worksheet that you can write on, that you can follow, that you can use to make sure that you've correctly found your baseline. You can use to gather the additional information that you're going to need and to develop your list of opportunities. And, you know, we recognize that there's never going to be a one-size-fits-all when it comes to urban wood use solutions. Some of the best plans are ones that, like, directly address a community's need and takes advantage of some of the existing resources. And there are tons of case studies out there that you can read through. You can read through the City of Flint, the one that I chaired and manned. You can read through work done in Baltimore and in other parts of the country, Elkhart, Indiana. But those case studies And while they're successful and inspiring, they can sometimes be frustrating to people who read them because it doesn't necessarily apply to your own situation. So these question-based worksheets really help you to discover what is your situation and what you need to do to move forward to build your wood use plan. So bulletin number 1, that's definitely where I would see it being a great place to launch, but you know, you may be in a different place. Bulletin number 2, it kind of expands on section 4 and 7 within the bulletin. So bulletin number 2 is building support for organization and community support. So this includes leadership. It may include your staff. We kind of look at it from all perspectives because, again, we weren't developing this just for, say, a wood utilization specialist for a city. It could be a nonprofit that works for the city or partners with the city. It could be an intern who finds this as a passion project. So we wanted to look at it from various angles. So the organizational could be leadership, but it might also be staff. And what you'll find is that this resource helps a lot with how to communicate effectively and how you want to communicate what wood utilization is. Because what you'll find is many people don't really know the idea of urban wood utilization, and they find it difficult to even understand because it's so unfamiliar to them. So this bulletin kind of helps you as the person who's interested in this to prepare for what some of the common questions and concerns that you're likely to face. A lot of those are probably going to be things that you have to think through. So again, using that follow up and making a list of different information, that still holds relevant here. Additionally, that one of the things that I know I would have loved when I was working in Flint is the free outreach template. I love templates in general, and this gives information on what has been effective in Michigan and how we talked in Michigan to various partners, to various the community, and how people can become more involved, why it's important, the responsibilities of, you know, being good stewards, and kind of one of the topics that we bring up throughout this bulletin is it's just because we're doing wood utilization doesn't mean that the forestry part of the entire process takes secondhand. You know, obviously, first and foremost, we want to promote active and successful urban forest management. Then once the tree does come to an age where it's declined, that's when this comes into play. Bulletin number 3 is one that explores product options for urban wood. And the product options can be some of the most fun things, in my opinion. Bulletin number 3 was where we did a lot of feedback from Kevin and Dave, because once that beloved tree leaves the stump, there's so many different paths that it can go on. And I know that many of the communities that you work for may say, well, the trees that we're removing are not in the condition to be saw logs. And so we wanted to explain, you don't need those. Not every tree is going to be a live edge slab. Some trees may be better used in a low quality, low wood residue state, so even compost or wood chips. So there are options. So you can access the link here for this one. The next 2 slides are going to kind of go into a little bit more detail on bulletin number 3, because I think that it helps people to understand sort of the pathways and opportunities available to them. So within bulletin number 3 is this urban wood flow chart, kind of explains some of the opportunities there. So it's as simple as we could make it. Trust me, I was one of the authors, and it was not hard. It was not easy. I thought flow charts were going to be easier than they are. But there's basically 2 main tracks for the flow of the wood residues that happen with municipal trees. And the primary decision point comes from kind of the center of the chart, and then from there, the municipal can send wood into the industry, or they can prepare it and kind of utilize it with themselves. And so that's kind of the direction it goes. So green is industry, yellow is kind of the process, and then red is municipal wood uses. So, you know, it really does start here with the removals, then having a log sorting and collection facility, which is one of the next bulletins, is huge. And then from there, you know, logs could be sold. Many of you are maybe familiar with Elkhart, Indiana, where they don't do any of the wood processing, they sell the logs. We have links to all of that in bulletin number 6. But let's say the municipality does sort out and they take the wood quality, the low quality logs, and they set them in one area and the high quality logs in another area. That really simplifies things, allows the high quality logs to either be bought by a log buyer, or they could be milled internally or milled externally and brought back. But there are so many uses for the high quality wood, but it requires a little bit more of an additional step than the low quality wood, which is the sawyering and the kiln operation, the drying. Now, there are some communities that use only green wood, and all they do is the sawmill operations, and they use the green wood to do cement repairs and other things that don't necessarily need to have dried wood. But right here, you'll see we have the fuel chips, the mulch, green lumber, and then the dried lumber. And on the excess log side, you see that there's equally a lot of various opportunities for wood industry partners. So the next slide is additionally a very useful chart. This slide is on the part of bulletin number 3, which is explaining the arborist market for wood residues. This was previously developed by the Tree Care Industry Association to provide a general overview of products and product opportunity for urban wood. The chart captures basically 3 main classes of wood residues: low value material, commonly suitable for large quantities and processed by simple or minimal amounts of equipment. Then there's mid-range value and high value materials. For any particular starting material, the chart explains like the suitability, the processing type, likely partners, equipment needs, possible markets, probable end users, and some product areas. Even include down here at the bottom, a link of resources for contacting markets, which I think is incredibly helpful. These links are also available in bulletin number 6, but just an awesome resource there. I always say an easy way to look at this is basically go to the left-hand side of this chart, and you know, it'll tell you what wood the wood form is in. And so let's say you're dealing with, you know, only chips and ground material, then you know you're just going to basically be staying within this one section. Really, the only crossover is the merchantable logs, which may be mid-range or high value. I'm sure there's going to be some questions on this chart and maybe the flow chart, so we'll be able to circle back to that. Bulletin number 4 explains the urban log collection and sorting yards, which I said was one of the main parts within the flow chart. This is a huge part that I was passionate about having in the toolkit. I know when I was developing this in Flint and then in Grand Rapids, having the wood at a location really was a great launching point to convince people and to just better utilize. It's very hard to not have a location. So basically, urban log collections and sorting yards, they're permanent locations that are continuously utilized to, process materials, residues. So maybe that's chips, maybe it's logs. There could be endless amounts of things. A landing is a temporary location that's used for sorting, decking, wood storage, but typically a landing is then transported to a yard or to this facility. But it's not to say that you can't use a temporary one if maybe you're doing work within a cemetery and you're going to have a lot of logs and you're going to bring a log fire in. Maybe a log landing would be all that you needed. Within this bulletin, we talk about a lot of different things, including, the general handling and regulatory parts of this, because Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, similar to other states across the country, they set certain standards, and they have a utilization and an effort that they like to set forth, which starts with avoiding waste, then utilizing waste, and properly disposing of waste. And although it uses the phrase waste, and many other people think of wood as waste, it's actually not considered a waste material. It's considered a source separated material because it can be converted into either a raw material or a new material in general. So, we need to, that's basically what these log yards need to be pitched to when it comes to your leadership, that this isn't a waste material, and we need to no longer think of this as a waste material. Instead, we need to think about this as a source separatable material that can be turned into something else. These processing yards have there's a lot of different options depending on what your community need is. So maybe you don't need to have as large of one. Maybe you're going to provide a site that allows people to come cut their own firewood. Well, then you're going to need to have parking. There's going to be some different things. So it is still very unique to you, but it will help you at least kind of think through some of the options when developing this. Oh, I did want to bring up one point about the log collection and sorting yard, which is something that has been hugely important to Grand Rapids, but co-locating and other logistics. That's one way that can help to pitch this to your municipality, is that, the log collection and sort yard and other wood processing and storage activities, they don't necessarily have to take place on their own separate facility. You could be co-locating this with maybe some of your other, your streets or your recycled asphalt and concrete or your other bulk material items, which is what Grand Rapids did. And in Flint, with the log collection and sorting yard, we didn't have one. And so I started developing one on a brownfield, Chevy in the Hole. Some of you are familiar with it. So it was an old automobile plant that had then turned into a brownfield, but with cement. So it was a nice, easy place for me to store logs. But then when it came time to actually do the processing, it was within the middle of the city. It wasn't very secure. And we found out that wasn't going to be the best place to process the logs. And so although we were able to store logs there for a really long time, actual processing needed to be at a different log sorting facility, which happened to end up being with a partner, which was not municipal. It was actually a mulch company who allowed us to process the high quality logs, and then free, no tipping fees, took the low quality logs for their own business. And so it was hugely beneficial to both organizations, and is one of the things that we discussed, is that you don't necessarily have to do this all internally. Partnerships are huge, which is a good segue into my next part, which is building relationships with wood industry partners. So partnerships are huge, and most examples of successful urban and community wood utilization efforts have been dependent on private-public partnerships. And they that there's a ton of useful information on how some of those private and public partnerships can occur. For instance, the work that was done in Flint was hugely private-public, and included collaborating with Habitat for Humanity, which is where the wood marketplace is housed. And additional lumber from Flint is also able to be utilized by Habitat for Humanity to build things like thresholds and mantles, non-graded wood. So that's why it's something like a mantle that wouldn't have any sort of integrity issues or need to be graded in any way. But these wood industry partners can be hugely beneficial. They can help you save tons of money, and it can be beneficial to them as well. And so the entire bulletin number 5 kind of talks about what are some potential partners and what are some questions that you, as somebody who's trying to organize this, should go into exploring and being prepared to either answer. One of the things that Jessica and I always joked about, we have a lot of experience with sawmills and kilns. My dad owns a sawmill and operates a sawmill, and you know, I jokingly added in there, like, we should talk about the fact that you should not you know, be surprised if it takes a long time to hear back from these people, because whenever you're working with these people, they don't really necessarily prioritize answering their emails. And so that might not even be the best form or medium to communicate with some of these groups. So we even talk about that within these toolkits, because, you know, knowing how to better communicate with a group of partners is hugely important. Bulletin number 6 is, like I said, it's the bulletin that kind of encompasses all of the resources that you would maybe need to build your plan. It's broken up into the following categories. It starts just with general wood use guides, which is where you can find Sam Sherrill's and the Forest Service's guide, among others. And then urban forest inventorying and evaluation. I'd love for there to be a toolkit all on this. I do a lot with urban forestry inventorying, and have always thought that, you know, a company like Davey or Arbor Pro, or, you know, any of these companies would benefit from including a wood quality or just any sort of wood analysis in their inventory. When you get an inventory back from a consulting inventory company, you get this huge Excel spreadsheet with all of this different information, but never have I ever seen one that includes a lot on the wood. And this could be a very helpful place to launch a lot of future decisions if you knew maybe how many usable logs there were, 8-foot or 16-foot could be decided on. So that was always one of the things that I thought would be a helpful or useful next part of the toolkit. But then also processing, logistics, wood handling regulations. I will tell you, don't just go out and start collecting your logs without reviewing the wood handling regulations, because although it's a source separated material, there are still laws in place on how long wood can be in one location without being fined, because it can become an eyesore. It can obviously decompose, and people may go in with good intentions and then unfortunately leave wood there for a very long time. So definitely check out those regulations. City wood utilization plans that are currently in place, because it's always useful to just take a look at those. Evaluating product opportunities, networking and education, communicating with the public, and grants and funding, which is something that should be checked out sooner than later, because maybe you want to get started and there may be an opportunity to find funding within your state or within the Forest Service to even just begin this process. So always take a look at that. Like I said, this webinar has been put on by the Urban Wood Network, and it was really just to launch it. We weren't going to go into specifics about the wood use plan or about any of the particular bulletins, but really just kind of show that this resource exists and allow people to digest it and go to it on their own. But we are curious as to whether or not it would be beneficial to have a webinar exactly on how to use the, the first backbone bulletin or whatnot. But like you heard earlier from Russell, it's very important that we support our Urban Wood Network because we are no longer funded, and we are now funded by memberships. And so you can actually access a link to the membership page and kind of learn more about membership benefits and your obligations by clicking on this page. I wanted to give a special thanks to everyone who made this webinar possible. We were a little worried when the government shutdown had happened, and the University of Wisconsin Extensions really stepped up and allowed us to continue on with it without any sort of interruption. And so we were really thankful about that. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to talk with anybody. There is going to be an opportunity following this for people to ask questions. And I think that Russell is going to be working on that. But my contact information is below. Feel free to send me an email. I'm really hopeful that this will be a tool that is utilized and, like I said, can continue to grow, and we can provide other valuable resources within it, either in future publications or with more webinars like this. Russell?
Thanks, Margaret. As stated below, this slide here will show how to ask questions. I will start reading off some of the questions for the presenters to ask. Margaret, if you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to start in on the discussion here. I've got questions that have came in that I will read aloud and let the presenters answer these questions. If possible, if we don't have an answer or we don't get to your question, we will have this list of questions and we will contact you after the webinar to answer your questions. So let me get started with the first question. First question is, if you have covered, has anyone covered connections with vocational schools for urban wood utilization?
Well, me personally not, but there, and this is something that maybe Dave and Kevin can speak on a little bit more. There's not even enough schooling for vocational schools for just forestry and traditional logging. So yeah, that has not happened to my knowledge, but maybe Dave or Kevin can speak on it more.
Well, this is Kevin, and I can't say from any experience specifically that we have any examples of that here in Michigan. There might be some, regionally or nationally, but I'm not very aware of them. I know that Michigan State University is reinitiating their urban and community forestry program, and they are supporting their urban wood utilization program called the MSU Shadows Project. And through that, the students who are going through the urban forestry curriculum do get exposure to urban wood utilization, demonstration, and involvement with portable sawmill work, but nothing more in depth than that I'm aware of at this point. It's a great idea.
Yeah, we actually have talked, or I have talked with some people about how I think it could be a good class for arborists. And when we hosted our wood grading workshops at DNR and Sustainable Resources and my company Salted Banjo, we had a lot of arborists come and take it. So that has always been something we've thought could be very useful for arboriculture.
Okay, thanks. We're going to go to the next couple questions here and try to put them together in one. Do you, just folks asking if you address maybe even more non-traditional uses of urban wood, such as like stream bank restoration projects, as far as logs for that, or use of wood in the floral industry, or landscaping for stakes and things like that, if that's something that's addressed or thought about.
Within the toolkit, specifically, we give lots of different examples of options, and I mean, specifically when it comes to things like restoration and conservation initiatives, I don't think that that's specifically something that we speak on, but we do talk about the various products that can come from the tree and whether or not that product would be useful in a conservation initiative. You may use the logs for turtle habitat, which is something that could easily be done, but we didn't really say that specifically, but we did say you could use the full log. But I don't think we specifically talk about the various conservation practices that could be put into place in all of the different forms of wood use. But I do think that there are some unique examples of wood use that are found in some of the case studies that we included in the toolkit. But maybe Dave has more information on that. Maybe there's technical difficulties.
Anyone else have anything to add? Okay, well, let's go to the next question. This question is, please address how to maintain a chain of command or custody, I assume, for wood that it could be infected with some disease, or if you're dealing with some sort of invasive species.
Yes, so this was something that we discussed, because actually with it right prior to this, we had a lot of oak wilt issues, and one of the projects that we were working on was with the Sustainable Resource Alliance to do a demonstration of wood harvesting. And so one of the wood harvesting sites that we were interested in doing was within the West Michigan Conservancy, which was an oak wilt stand, a stand of oak trees that had been infected with oak wilt. And in that, we kind of did a lot more research on what the process was for utilizing trees that were infected by invasive species, and it is very in depth. It could be it could be an entire toolkit, and that could be on each of the individual species that are out there. But throughout, you'll see things on emerald ash borer, which is kind of the impetus to Jessica and I's involvement in wood utilization. But now things like oak wilt and other invasive species and forestry epidemics are making wood products more available, and we should be considering wood utilization as an option when trees are being removed for such things as oak wilt and other infestations. But specifically in these 6 bulletins, we don't go into the specifics on it, but we are well aware that that is something that is a untapped or a part of wood utilization that there aren't a lot of resources on. And so that there is a key example of why we were hoping to expand the toolkit and have more future publications.
And this is Kevin. I recall that the Dovetail Partners put out a report recently about urban wood utilization, green markets, and a large part of that, I believe, dealt with this chain of custody, but not specifically as it related to invasive species pest problems. But there might be something relevant in reading through that. So, and that's accessible on their website, Dovetail Partners. along with a number of other very relevant and useful reports on this issue.
Okay, thanks. Let's go to the next question. Do urban wood programs ever utilize wood from rural areas such as conservancy lands?
Well, yeah, so I kind of segued in that when I was talking about that past project. So in that, I think actually was in 2017 and part of 2018, we demonstrated my company, Sculptor Banjo, worked with the Land Conservancy of West Michigan to demonstrate a traditional forestry practice harvest, which we worked in a park that was trying to do restoration project of a red pine stand. Obviously, red pine wasn't the historical cover type that was there, and so they wanted to actually clear cut a small little part so that they could encourage sort of an oak mixed conifer stand to grow back. So we were kind of gutsy to get involved with that. So we were actually involved in a conservancy clear cut where we utilized the wood. We worked with a timber company on a Cherry Creek, actually. That's a timber company in Michigan that does posts and fence posts, which was perfect for this stand because the stand had very poor height diameter ratios and basically had the same size, but were super long, super tall and high, and there was a good amount of wood within that stand, but typically 5 acres would be something that nobody would be interested in because it would be small, and we were kind of showing how with the right buyer, the right person interested, with the right partner, you can accomplish that. So we were able to do this clear cut for totally free for the conservancy, which typically when they have to do tree work in conservancies, they pay for it. It's not done by a forestry company. They might bring in a tree service company. And then in addition to that, we worked on another one of their sites that was converting a golf course into a restored conservation land that could have recreation in it. And we did a hazardous abatement, and we took hazardous trees from the future trail sites. So they were going to establish trails in these certain areas on this golf course that was being converted. And we looked and we took all of the hazardous trees and then we milled them on site. And we actually gave green lumber out to anyone who attended that milling demonstration. And that was a really interesting partnership because we partnered with a tree service company and the conservancy to do the tree removal. So we do have examples of it in our case studies, but the toolkit itself really looks at more of developing the plan and not really at those sorts of actionable next steps, which could be for future toolkit publications.
Okay, thank you. Had a question about how to get the network and folks more involved in the local chapter of ISA in Michigan, and they provided their contact information, so we will be in contact with you on that. Some other questions. A question here for Kevin. One person was asking about something you referenced, I think with Dovetail Partners. They were asking what exactly that was you referenced.
I'd have to dig out the actual link or title. I'm just going off memory here. But if you go on Dovetail Partners' website, they have a really pretty good library of reports, research-related items under the reports section. And one of the recent ones related to urban wood utilization had to do with, I want to say the title had something about marketing and green markets for urban wood utilization. And within that one, it talked about the chain of custody process for certification purposes and things like that. So, but like I said before, there's a number of relevant related reports and articles on urban wood utilization and other things, but I don't have their specific website address in front of me.
I think somebody put it within the questions. They put the report there for you, a link to it.
Yeah, in the questions there, it's the dovetail-incorporated.org under reports, increasing urban wood use awareness and product demand, and analysis of green market opportunities.
Yeah, I think that was right.
Thank you, Catherine. She put it out.
Here's a next question. Is the Urban Wood Network or networks profitable for all stakeholders in the supply chain? Or are other outcomes the main goals, such as keeping wood out of landfills, etc.?
I can answer it, or if Dave wants to jump in at all, he can. But I think it's a combination. The toolkit is we do hope that it increases just awareness on what could be done instead of what is currently done in many areas. But yes, obviously we have goals to reduce the amount of wood waste that ends up in landfills. And one of the things during the process of looking through the regulations, we spoke with a lot of people with the EPA and the DEQ, and they always said that people should be prepared for changes in legislation that does outlaw logs being put into the landfill. Currently, it doesn't at certain sizes, and so, but that's something that could be anticipated. And so, yes, it's a goal of ours, but also it should be a goal of everybody's, because that may not be an option for some states in the nearish future. I don't want to say when, because they didn't really explain when, but there are some states who are looking at not allowing wood waste to enter the landfills. So if that's the case, then there's going to be a lot of changes even to traditional urban forest management.
This is Dave Newman. We really don't know a whole lot about the volume of wood that's removed from urban forests currently, and where that wood goes. We're still at the beginning stages of an urban forest inventory through the USDA Forest Service, as many of you know, is working on expanding the urban forest inventory component of the National Forest Inventory that they do every year. And in the future, in maybe about 7 years, in many of our locations, many of our states, we may have a complete set of data and be able to start tracking changes in the amount of wood removed from urban forests, and with some luck, hopefully be able to discriminate among the disposal methods. But there's certainly a lot of value there, and there are certainly a number of barriers that do, provide some disincentive for, diverting some of that wood into higher value product streams. Michigan is one of the cheapest states in the nation for tipping fees at landfills. And there's been some discussion about raising tipping fees to provide some incentive to, encourage recycling or upcycling of wood. But a lot more to be done on that.
Okay, thanks. I think we have made it through all the questions that have been sent in. Does anyone else have any more questions they can send in quickly? We still have some time left. Or do any of the presenters have any other closing remarks they would like to share?
I just, want to add that if there are specific questions on the toolkit itself, that I'm happy to answer them and can be reached via email if there are specific questions on any of the certain topics. And I'm kind of going to be taking that responsibility on for both Jessica and I as the authors. So I might be the best person if you're interested in speaking with one of us to direct your question to. Not that Jessica won't provide input, but just I'm going to be doing that. And then also I wanted to remind people that they should become a member of the network, because without that membership, we wouldn't be able to have webinars and discussions like this.
I'd also like to add, if anyone has any suggestions, comments, recommendations for improvement, or additions to the toolkit, feel free to share them with the authors or with Kevin and I, Carrie at the Urban Wood Network. We'd be happy to collaborate with the authors in the future on additions to the toolkit. Thanks.
I've got a couple more questions here, really quickly. First one says, does anyone know on average if, I assume, salvaging of logs for urban wood utilization is cheaper or more expensive than standard operating procedures for what's done with logs?
It varies from state to state. I don't know exactly where Cody is, but there's an initial investment in wood utilization. Typically, let me kind of go over what some of those are in the toolkit. But typically staffing is the investment but that changes because there's also some expenses that would change. Instead of paying the typical tipping fees or the fees to have your wood chips collected at the end of the year and disposed of, you are paying a staff person to kind of man and develop this. So, there's kind of trade-offs, but there is research that is out there on kind of the expense savings. Dovetail is a great resource that you can go to find more on the expense savings. And also those resources may also be available on the Urban Wood Network. But it is really, it's not even just state to state. It's different based on what your community's current practices are, because everybody's standard operating practices and procedures are different. I know in Flint, when I started there, we didn't have any crews, so all of our hazardous abatements were contracted. That makes things a lot different. The price is then in that contract for wood waste disposal. So we had to adjust our contracts when we said, no, now we're not going to do any disposal. Instead, we want the trees brought to this brownfield. Well, that's actually was a lot easier on our contractors because the brownfield was so centrally located and we didn't charge a tipping fee, which meant we had to change that contract. But for some communities, if their facility is far away, then there's going to be extra costs for their contractors and or for their own crews. And that's in bulletin number 4, we do talk about location and what is most cost effective when looking at developing maybe a municipal wood collection facility.
Thanks. Just a couple of things here, some more things coming in to remind everyone that you can join the Urban Wood Network. Again, it's we have the membership agreement and a $50 fee. And if you go to urbanwoodnetwork.org, you can see to join. You can also, on the Urban Wood Network website, you can download this webinar to watch it again. There is a couple other things. Margaret, they had asked about if you put your flow charts back up again quickly and just some explaining if possible. We have a little bit of time.
Yeah, so the flow chart is here. Basically, the center is kind of is the community. So you have your municipality as a whole, the urban forestry department, and really that department kind of looks at tree removals and then plantings and maintenance. That's how urban forestry kind of rolls. And one of the things I like to point out about wood utilization is that it is sustainable, and like you are replanting and you're kind of continually having this resource. So you can take a lot of what, maybe you're a forester who studied in resource management, you can take a lot of what you learned about traditional forestry practices and implement it in an urban area. And so that's where this idea of having a log landing or log sorting and collection facility really stems from. Those are what you do in traditional forestry, is you have one of those facilities in place because it helps logistically. Either you collect enough wood that transportation costs are low enough, or it allows you to just have an idea of what the volume and quality is. So from that yard can, again, it does not have to be just a municipal yard. That's like kind of shaded half gray and half yellow, because there's so many examples of partnerships with various tree service companies, mulch companies, or other companies out there. So it really could be run by a partner. It does not have to be run internally. Maybe your wood collection yard facility just starts with a conversation with a mulch producer. Maybe they have extra space and would be interested in having logs brought there and sorted because they find the value of being a partner with the city or with whomever. And then from there are so many options to allow you to just sell the high quality logs. Maybe you go status quo with everything else, but you just sort out high quality, which some communities do. And then all the various different residues, there is a market for those things. So mulch and compost is definitely something that businesses can make a lot of money on. So municipalities similarly could put those practices into place, and some do. Fuel chips and firewood, there are communities, and these are things you can find within Bulletin 6, some case studies. There are communities who burn wood to run their forestry building, their department. And so it obviously makes sense to have fuel chips and firewood, but obviously those types of wood burners or cogen plants are something that you have to know are in place. So that's really why it's kind of finding your baseline. If you don't have the capacity to burn wood for fuel, that might not be the first location or first stop you think of. You don't want to necessarily be making fuel chips and then get into the fuel chip industry, but it might make sense to make fuel chips and be doing, firewood if your community burns wood or uses fuel chips to heat their facilities. Again, the sawmill and operations and the kiln operations, those are colored gray and yellow because that doesn't necessarily have to be internally managed by a municipality. More often than not, we don't have a ton of kiln operations that are going on in municipalities, but you do historically have a lot of sawmills. And Kevin brought up a great point that you can see the historic sawmills of Detroit. And in general, one of the things I've told people who I work with Urban Wood is it used to be that there was sawmills very close to all communities, even cities. A lot of things were processed all internally, and it wasn't until, you know, more recently in the last 50 years that some of those smaller sawmills have closed, and trucking and logistics to moving wood further have been needed. And so having a sawmill operation is kind of taking us back to where we used to be. We used to have sawmill operations closer to the cities that are producing wood and the communities around the city that are producing wood. And you may find that there is still one in place in your community, especially if you're in a rural community or you're in a, you know, really heavily forested area, that would maybe be open to being your partner, and you could always use the wood as to cover some of the expense if you had the quality of wood. But one of the other things we wanted a lot of people to know is it isn't always a money maker. We're not promoting wood utilization as being like a money maker. We know it helps save costs, but we're not at this point successful at saying this is going to make a community money. And so don't go into it with this intention that you're going to somehow make it really rich, or that your community is going to have all this big influx of money. You're not going to be the Weyerhaeuser or Plum Creek of cities. Are there any other specifics on the toolkit or on the flow chart? The green is just all these various options for wood products, and it kind of within that those arrows points out what would be some of the parts of the tree that would be able to be used there. I will say with cogen plants, you want to make sure you know the dimensions of the cogen plant, because they may only be able to accept a certain size piece of wood.
Margaret, I think you covered it. One quick question, and then I think we're going to wrap things up. There was just a quick question here of has anyone created a partnership with their local municipality to cut ash trees for urban wood use?
Yes, that is kind of something that we did a lot of, and now we're really, we're still promoting it for some communities, but here in Michigan, many of those communities that were most hit with emerald ash borer kind of have either implemented that or are treating their trees and haven't removed their trees. But yes, for sure, that was Flint, that was Ann Arbor, that was a lot of communities in Michigan.
Thanks, Margaret. Could you advance to the very last slide?
Yeah.
I think we're getting to the end of our time. We're going to have to wrap things up. Again, thanks for joining us today on the webinar about the Urban Wood Toolkit. If we didn't get to your question or you have additional questions, as you can see the information there, you can contact Don Peterson and his email and phone number. And again, join us, sign up for the Urban Wood Network, and you can see all of our partners there at the bottom of the screen. Again, thanks for everyone joining in today.
Thank you.